Well, I'm here at Grafton. Are we all here? Grafton SES with the Emergency Services Minister, Steph Cook, the Deputy Commissioner of the State Emergency Services, as well as local members, Gurmesh Singh and Chris Galaptis. But importantly here, with many of our wonderful volunteers from the State Emergency Services. Today, obviously, we've tragically heard of the death of the third flood victim in Lismore. Can I say on behalf of the government and the people of New South Wales, our thoughts and prayers with the families, and our hearts go out to all of them. It's obviously been a very difficult time. The volunteers here, though, are doing an amazing job. I heard stories today of around 4,000 sandbags that have been filled over the course of the week. People coming not just locally, but from Sydney. Many here haven't been in their homes and seen their families for a week, on the line, ensuring that we keep our community safe. As we know, through this period of time, we are seeing today, as the Minister and I were able, as we can't get into, at this stage, Ballina or Lismore, we had the opportunity to fly over and see the devastating impacts of this flood. We know, and it's certainly clear today, that as we move through this period, we have a strong focus on the here and now and the immediate, and that is to save lives and get people through this difficult time. But we're already turning to the recovery, and from the scenes we saw this morning, this recovery will not be taking days and weeks. It could be months and well ahead of that. So it's going to be all hands on deck during this period of time. I think we are incredibly blessed as a state to have such fantastic volunteers, and to meet the SES and working very closely here with the Defence Force, everyone coming together to get our community through. And I think that's when our state is at its best, facing adversity. When these difficult situations arise, we come together as a community, and it's not just the volunteers from the SES and our Rural Fire Service, right across the board. I've heard stories today of many members of the community coming along, lending a hand, providing support to get the community through, and I think that's incredibly impressive, and it shows the true character and the values of our great people. In addition to that, today I've written to the Prime Minister in relation to Category D funding. He's advised me that will be turned around today. That will provide additional support. We've had 17 council areas now across our state that have been declared national disaster zones, and we know not just the issues up here in the Northern Rivers, but as we move through the course of the week, we're seeing Sydney facing a difficult time today. We expect that to go to the South Coast over the course of the week. We need to make it clear, as we do in every press conference, and my clear message is this: please continue to follow the instructions of our state and emergency services. These instructions, as I've said, are not here for the sake of it. They're here to keep people safe. And we hear many stories when first those evacuation warnings come in, and then the evacuation orders come in, that people still do not evacuate. And they do not evacuate because of their past experience with floods. This is an unprecedented event, an unprecedented situation that requires an unprecedented response. We have our volunteers on the front line, putting their lives at risk to keep people safe. So please, everyone, as these floods move through from the north to the south, that we follow those instructions, those evacuation warnings, if they're in place, please prepare, please get ready to leave. And if you can do so safely, please evacuate at that point. And obviously when those evacuation orders are in place, please follow those instructions and evacuate. We know as well, and I can confirm, that we're doing everything we can in terms of the evacuation centres. There are obviously stories, particularly in the Northern Rivers, of some of those evacuation centres that are short on supplies. We are working right across government through our State Emergency Operations Centre to provide that support in the immediate, to provide temporary accommodation. All those logistical issues are being worked through at the moment. That support is being provided, particularly on housing through the Department of Justice. But there is a lot of work to be done, and our focus is on our people, and our commitment as a government is to get every single person through this. And as we move through this difficult time as well, not just keeping people safe, not just getting people into housing, but ultimately at the end of it, getting every one of our communities who have been affected by these floods back on their feet as quickly as possible. And we will not spare a dollar in doing that. We'll provide whatever assistance we can. Our people are incredibly resilient. It has been a hell of a 2 years, even longer, from droughts to fires to floods, the pandemic, and now floods again. In fact, I was up here, it seems like yesterday, when fires had ripped through these communities, created significant devastation across the board, but our people bounced back and they will come back again through this difficult time. And from a government perspective, we will be here to do whatever we can to help every single person through this. We hear stories of the human cost, but we know as well there'll be significant psychological impacts, physical impacts that come through this. But as a community, I think we can take a lot of heart. Our spirits are high, and we'll continue to do whatever we can to help New South Wales and every single one of our people get through this difficult time. Before I pass to Steph Cook, I just want to make that final point. And it is very clear from being up here, very clear from speaking to the volunteers and the State Emergency Services personnel who are based here. Please follow those instructions. Please don't have your past experience with floods inform your current experience, your current position when those orders are made. Those orders are there to keep you and your family safe. Please follow those instructions, and that will ensure we all get through this together. I'll now pass to Steph Cook, our Emergency Services Minister, to make some comments.
Thank you, Premier. Well, the next 24 hours are absolutely critical. Whilst we are all hoping for the very best, we must be prepared for the worst. Sydney, as we know, is on high alert right now, and to everyone in that Sydney region, we ask you please to keep an eye on the bomb warnings, to keep an eye on the evacuation warnings if they are issued, and which may escalate into evacuation orders issued by the SES, the combat agency in this disaster. Every single community is on a different part of the journey in relation to this disaster event. Right here where we are in Grafton, these communities and others have seen the worst of it come through and are now in the very early stages of clean-up and recovery. We have other communities as we move south from here, along with the weather system moving south, who are entering the next phase of preparedness and being on alert. Sydney is copping a battering as we speak. That will continue for some time. Of course, all of our attention is on Warragamba Dam, which spilled in the early hours of this morning, and at this stage we are expecting something similar to March of 2021. So being up here in the Northern Rivers area today, it's been an absolute honour and privilege for me to spend some time with our SES volunteers. I think it's fair to say I have orange in my blood, and it's wonderful for me personally to be reunited with the volunteers in an organisation that I have been a member of for a number of years now, and who I know do such a wonderful job helping our communities day in, day out, particularly in a crisis like this. We're also joined here today by SES volunteers from Victoria, and alongside other emergency services volunteers from other states, including South Australia. We just issue them the warmest of welcomes and say thank you so much for coming and lending a hand at this time. Our volunteers are tired, as everyone can probably imagine. They've been working around the clock now for days and days and days. Right here at this unit, these guys have done 38 flood rescues in less than 24 hours. They've responded to over 400 requests for assistance in that time. They've still got more work to do, but having spoken to them here this morning, I know that they will keep on it one job at a time until they see it out right to the end. And so to these communities up here, I would say thank you very much for your patience with the SES. We are a group of fantastic volunteers, but a lot of our units are small. And in this Clarence Valley area, we have 10 units and a total volunteer base of about 120 volunteers. So they are working frantically. Of course, they are supported so well by our other emergency services organisations. The RFS, Surf Lifesaving New South Wales have got their boats out and about, giving the SES a hand to rescue people and go to the aid of people in our communities. Fire and Rescue, of course, continue to do a wonderful job alongside police and ambulance, and of course our Defence Force. And we have in this area a Defence Force unit who, for once, are able to pitch in and help their own communities. Over the recent years, when we've had natural disasters in other parts of the state, the ADF from this region has travelled on deployment to other parts of the state to give them a hand. And how wonderful it was to hear their stories today, being able to stay here in their local communities and help out the people that they know in the communities that they love. So I had the opportunity, of course, with the Premier to head up into the sky and view some of the floodwaters from the air. And all I can say is what I have seen is beyond anything that I could have ever imagined. The widespread flooding is just simply extraordinary. And you've got two options, I think, at that point. You either run for the hills, so to speak, or it strengthens your resolve. And from my perspective, and as the Premier has indicated, we stand firm with our communities. We will continue to work alongside you. I know that this is a very, very difficult time. The floodwaters are only now really starting to recede. That will continue over the days ahead, of course, and then the clean-up effort will commence in earnest. We have Resilience New South Wales already out on the ground in our evacuation centres, making sure that that we understand the support that people need, and we get that support to them in the most timely fashion possible. Of course, we have some difficulties around supply chains. We've got roads that are still cut. We are able to get some supplies in by air, and that will continue indefinitely. So I'm just really wanting to reach out to the community and say, I've seen the destruction myself firsthand. The Premier has been alongside me to do that, and we are in lockstep with the Prime Minister, with the federal government, with the state government more broadly, with our local MPs to make sure that we get our community through this difficult journey. It will be a long road ahead, but I know that if we all work together, if we pull together and we simply don't give up, we will get through this. Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate first up the comments by the Premier and also Minister Cook in regards to preparation. So for those that are entering into danger periods, especially in the Greater Sydney area and South Coast, that you are prepared, you do heed the warnings and the evacuation orders should they come, and act as you've been instructed. The SES doesn't take it lightly in terms of when they do issue the warnings and the orders, and it's important that you're prepared and ready to act. I wanted to also thank our partner agencies, our interstate colleagues, the ADF, who have assisted greatly with the response up here in Grafton and the surrounds of northern New South Wales. Work goes on. We've got lots of work that continues and jobs and requests for assistance, and the SES continues to do that with partner agencies. The next step as well, after the waters do subside, obviously, is the recovery and the resilience by the communities to continue to do so with that. Resilience New South Wales will continue to assist with that action and assist communities with getting back on their feet. But I also just want to make sure that we do thank our SES colleagues and the emergency service volunteers, their families, the communities around them for everything they do. I'm quite humbled by the work that they perform, and also I wanted to thank the employers that allow. Quite often these people are employed elsewhere in full-time jobs, and they're allowed to actually go and take time out to contribute back to the community, to respond during a time of need and give back during our hour of need. Thank you.
Premier, what information are you being given about the process of the SES and the other emergency services going from house to house and sadly discovered 2 bodies yesterday. What are you being told about what they could find in the coming days?
Well, I think we could expect more tragedy to occur. I mean, from what we've seen, particularly in relation to those Northern River towns in Lismore and in Ballina, that as the floods recede, that we are going to see more tragedy. And it's been an incredibly difficult time. These are unprecedented floods that we are seeing right across our state. And our volunteers, as we've said, are doing an amazing job in trying to do everything they can to keep people safe, to conduct those rescues. But ultimately, in these circumstances, tragedy occurs. And we've seen that now in 4 people lose their lives, 3 here up in the Northern Rivers. And, you know, it is possible that, you know, more people will die as we move through this challenging and difficult time. But what I do know is that the coordination from a state government level through our emergency operations centres with our state emergency service, working with the RFS, working with Resilience New South Wales, and then working with the Commonwealth and the ADF are doing everything they can to provide the care and support that people need in these affected areas. I particularly want to thank the ADF as well. We have members here today, and that support, that combined support from a Commonwealth and state, and it was remiss of me not to mention the councils as well. I know the Minister is in daily meetings with mayors in these areas. Spoke today to the 2 other local members here, Janelle Saffin, Tamara Smith, for their insights in relation to what further support will be needed, and there will be a lot. And the coordination here is key, and that information getting fed through ensures that we can actively and rapidly provide that support when we can. It's more problematic in circumstances where you look, as we go further north into Ballina, into Lismore, that many of these communities are cut off. So particularly working with the ADF and Resilience New South Wales, we're being able to provide that support. Particularly concerned right now, from my perspective, in getting essential supplies into those evacuation centres, and as well getting people into temporary accommodation. That work is being conducted right across government, and I can just assure you we want to do everything we can to get people back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Premier, we've heard reports there are a group of people who were found deceased in a Lismore motel. Have you heard anything further about this?
Look, I think as we move through this period of time, I think it's important that we get you know, I need that information verified, and once I've received that, then we publicly announce it. So I think, you know, given the mass destruction that we're seeing in various towns across our state, there will always be this information that comes through. What's important from a government perspective is we get the information. Once that information is clarified, we provide it to the public. I don't think it's beneficial to be running commentary in relation to those circumstances. Once those situations have been confirmed, I will provide that public information.
And we've had that same view this morning of no body found. We saw those images back on Monday, thousands of people walking out of there, chest high in water, bewildered and stunned at what had happened. Are you confident that the warnings process for those people was as effective as possible in these circumstances?
We'll always review that, I think, as we move through, and I think whenever you go through these tragic natural disasters, there's always the role of government to look across the board and review processes that were in place. I know that through the coordination that we've had, particularly in New South Wales, this is not the first time we've gone through this. This has been, over the last 4 years, natural disaster after natural disaster after natural disaster. And there's been key learnings along the way, particularly in relation to, I think, warnings, particularly in relation to the cleanup. One of the concerns that we have, and that's why we keep saying it at every press conference, is follow the instructions of the SES. I've heard today firsthand many stories from the SES about when those evacuation warnings are provided, that people don't follow that instruction. When the evacuation orders are issued, that they, in certain circumstances, are not followed. And I think a lot of that has to do with previous experience. But what we're seeing here is an unprecedented event. People can go back to the 1950s and have an expectation, a personal experience, and say, well, that's okay, where I'm located, I've been fine in the past. But that doesn't mean you'll be fine today or in the future. So What's most important is that we follow those instructions, not just to keep yourself safe, but I believe importantly as well, to respect our volunteers. Respect our volunteers who are putting their lives at risk to protect our community. And so we need to do everything we can as the situation develops. And what we've particularly seen up here in the Northern Rivers has been a rapidly changing situation that has occurred over the last week. But rest assured we were doing everything we can right across government, all government agencies working together. The establishment of the State Emergency Operations Centre, even from my experience in government, has ensured that there is much greater collaboration. We don't have various areas of government working in silos, working in isolation. And naturally, when you have these situations occurred, we had a hospital in Ballina today that had to be evacuated. The ability for us to take a step back and have all those agencies around the table passing on the information and having a response as quickly as possible, I think has been a stark improvement in relation to government response to natural disasters. But to the original point in the question, our focus right now is to keep people safe, ensure that those evacuations occur safely that are still underway, and ultimately get the recovery underway as quickly as possible. It has already begun. I want to see every one of our communities get back on their feet. It is going to be a mammoth task. It is going to take a long period of time, but we want to stand side by side with every single person who's been affected, every single business that has been affected, every single farm and agricultural producer across our state who's affected by these floods. We will work with you to get you through. And then once that's passed, if there are things that we can learn from and say, well, when this happens again, here's how things, here's what could change, we will. But I think it's way too premature for that. And what I've seen in terms of the response to this compared to sat through as former Treasurer, bushfires that were up here as well and down South Coast, and the floods that occurred, the coordination and cooperation, not just across the state government and its agencies, but also with the Commonwealth Government and with local councils, I think has had a marked improvement on where we were just 4 years ago.
The situation in Sydney, Premier,
Yeah.
the rain has been pouring, it's been delayed somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any concern about some complacency because it's been delayed?
Well, let's just go back to the previous question. No one should be complacent. No one should be complacent. That when instructions are provided by the State Emergency Services, they need to be followed. We have seen torrential rain in Sydney now for 2 weeks, very similar to the situation that was occurring in the Northern Rivers. We saw Warragamba Dam spill, as the Minister has said, the Warragamba Dam was built ahead of what we expected, ahead of time. And we know, just from 12 months ago, when we were out in the Hawkesbury, and when many homes were lost, as in that severe flooding. So it's best to be prepared, and that's exactly what we are. That's exactly what the government's doing in Sydney. And once again, and I think people are certainly aware, if they look up north and see the challenges that we've faced up here, that those challenges could also occur in the Sydney metropolitan region and further down the south coast later in the week. So the key message, which we keep saying, is follow the instructions. That's the best way to keep you and your family safe, and know very well that our SES volunteers, our RFS, our police, the ADF, everyone across the board is doing everything they can to keep you safe. Saving human life is our number one focus, and getting every single person through this difficult time we are completely committed to, just as we've done in the past.
Fast-tracking category 15
Yeah.
funding, what will that mean for the average resident who's lost absolutely everything in this disaster?
Yeah, so good question. So we've applied today, and that's a 50-50 funding arrangement. That goes towards providing support for primary producers, for businesses, and getting money on the ground as quickly as possible. Now, Category D funding also works in a way that where we see a need in an extreme circumstance, that we'll work with the federal government to ensure that that funding is provided to those people who need it, to those businesses who need that support, and also there's some support there for local councils, support for infrastructure. So fast tracking it means we're ahead of the situation and we can get that money out the door as quickly as possible. Now, that means providing financial support to people. It means providing financial support for businesses to get them back up, and also to ensure that we are able to invest in the infrastructure that has been damaged by these devastating floods. And seeing today, some of those areas, it's very clear to me this is going to be a long road, a tough journey, but as Premier, I'm completely committed to getting every single person through this. But I really appreciate the support and the turnaround from the Prime Minister in relation to that. I know he's committed to doing the same. And we're just going to work as hard as we can around the clock to get everyone back on their feet. But based on the devastating scenes that I've seen, it's going to take a lot of work.
And you made some general statements about getting support into evacuees. Apparently there's a pretty desperate situation at Edmonds Head right now.
Yeah.
A lot of evacuees there, and a spokesman for the local council making a personal plea to you this morning to get food in there.
Yeah.
What are you aware of in terms of that situation, and how quickly is food going to get into Edmonds Head?
Yeah, so good question. I've spoken just a little while earlier to at that evacuation centre and is working very closely with the ADF, and the ADF will be providing food supplies into Evans Head. So that is underway as we speak. And obviously, this will not, in my view, be an outlier situation. I would expect, as certain towns are cut off, that this issue in relation to freight and the provision of essential services is going to become an issue. And having that's why it's even more important to have that coordination right across the board. But my understanding in relation to Evans Head is that it's underway, and the ADF are working very closely with the police to get those provisions there as quickly as possible.
Is that Resilience New South Wales model still the right one? You're obviously spending tens of millions of dollars, and there are questions about whether it's appropriate use of the money.
I think, well, let's see as we go through this. I mean, I certainly believe that one of the key factors of success with Resilience New South Wales will be on the recovery. The state we are in a unique situation right now where we are dealing with evacuations and rescues and keeping people safe and saving lives at the same time building for a recovery and getting communities back on their feet as quickly as possible. We are going to have people return to their businesses, return to their homes, and find them in a tragic state. And we will be doing everything we can to get every single person through this. And from my perspective as Premier, and through the work that we do through the State Emergency Operations Centre in Homebush, working with Resilience New South Wales as a coordinator between the SES, the RFS, Health, going into the ADF, the Emergency Management Centre, at a federal government level, this is the whole of government approach that's going to get us through. And I see Resilience New South Wales playing a key and integral role in helping get every single community back on their feet as quickly as possible. But there's also short-term concerns that we're focused on right now. I don't want to see people staying in evacuation centres for extended period of time. I want people in temporary accommodation who need it, and that's what we're working towards. And before, you just have DCJ, the Department of Communities and Justice, coordinating temporary accommodation. Yes, that's a focus for them, but I need the whole of government focus to ensure that as these issues arise in every local community over the course of this period, that information is getting sent up and decisions are being made and acted on as quickly as possible. Nothing is going to get lost in the bureaucracy, and I think that Resilience New South Wales will play a key role in ensuring we get every community back on its feet, and information that comes through that is discrete and unique to those certain communities is fed up the chain and action taken.
And what do you make of these reports that the looting and extra police are coming up to the north?
Well, I'd say, that is just utterly disgraceful. And, the exception proves the rule, though. And that is that what I see when I've been going around, what I see here today with our amazing volunteers is the best of our country and the best of our state on show, on display. And adversity always brings out the best. Our people in New South Wales are incredibly, incredibly resilient. We have gone through hell and back over the last 4 years, particularly our regional communities. You know, whether it's been drought and coming off the back of that, the bushfires, the floods, the pandemic, everyone has been affected, and yet we still stand strong. So my key message would be, and I shouldn't even have to give it, because it's bloody common sense, and that is we look after each other during this period of time, and that is what everyone is doing. So let's not focus on some small minority. If those actions are occurring, which I hadn't been briefed on, that's a disgrace. But what I do know is that the spirit of service of our people is incredibly strong. The generosity, the fact that we have so many people coming out and volunteering. We have in New South Wales one of the highest volunteerism rates anywhere in the world. And that is the quality of our people, the values of our people that will ensure together we will get through this and come out stronger the other side.
Premier, today your deputy spoke about raising the warragamba wall
Yeah.
and said that the flood showed why the government should actually be building more dams and raising more walls.
Yeah.
Do you support this, and do you agree with the raising of the wall as an appropriate flood mitigation strategy?
Well, the government's been working through the raising of the Warragamba Dam wall for some time now. It's a very complex project that the government is committed to and working through, and obviously there's been a number of business cases and work that's occurred at a governmental level, and we continue to in fact it's been going on since 2011, but it's not an easy feat. There are not just construction challenges, there are also environmental challenges that come with that project. We'll continue to work through it. And you know, our ultimate aim here is to take actions to protect communities. We also shouldn't just have these discussions when we hit natural disasters. We should be having these discussions on a regular basis and investing where it's actually going to make a difference and save lives. The government will continue to work through that project as we have been now for close to a decade.
Premier, similar to Evan said, there are some small communities in the Currans Valley, such as Elmira and McLean, who are cut off and are facing days and days without supplies. Have you had a chance on being briefed on those?
Yes, we have, yes. And rest assured we're doing everything we can to get supplies into those areas. I was just on the way here speaking to the Regional Roads Minister in relation to where we can get more freight into those areas. Now, ultimately we've got to keep people safe, particularly in circumstances where a number of those communities like McLean are isolated, and we are working through that. And as well working through the ADF. If we can do that by way of air, we will. And we are working around the clock to do that. We do not want to, we want to ensure that every single community has access to the supplies they need to help get them through. And whether that's by freight or whether that's by air, we are looking at all options to do that.
I mean, Grafton hasn't had a flood in here for 7 years, I think. But in the last 10 years, it's getting closer. Wouldn't that resilience sort of funding be something that could be directed to our levee walls or our flood mitigation system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the role. The role of Resilience New South Wales is not just in recovery, it's in prevention. And there are things that we can invest in that will make a difference. Ultimately as well though, we live in a country that always has and always probably will have substantial natural disasters. And sometimes you sit there and you think, well, there's only so much we can do, but where we can make a difference, we will. And that's the type of investment that I think should be looked at, that will ensure that where we do have flooding, it is mitigated. We need to look at areas where there will be fires in the future, but the communities are supported and that risk is reduced. And that is the role that Resilience will provide. And I know as the former Treasurer, whenever there's been requests for funding from the Rural Fire Service, from the State Emergency Service, through all those areas of government, we've always provided it because our number one responsibility is to keep our people safe, and that's what we'll continue to do. So I see Resilience New South Wales and its role. It's obviously very early days. It's only recently been set up. It's obviously led by the former Commissioner, and the role will not simply be limited to recovery. The role includes prevention. So the advice that comes through Resilience New South Wales will be adopted by the government. Thanks, everyone.